She was only 22 when the richest rancher in the territory handed her a deed that everyone believed was a death sentence. The old Ashby estate had been abandoned for nearly 20 years. The wells had dried. The barns had collapsed. Even wolves avoided its empty corrals. The townspeople whispered that no one who settled there ever stayed long. Silas Braddock smiled as he handed his maid the keys. He believed he was burying her future. But hidden beneath the weathered floorboards of the abandoned ranch house lay journals written by a forgotten frontier widow, pages that would teach Eliza Boone how to build not only the greatest ranch in the territory, but a life no one could ever take away. The rancher thought he had given her a grave. Instead, he had unknowingly given her a kingdom. Before you ride into this story with me, do something for yourself. Press subscribe, not for me, but so you never lose your place in a tale worth finishing. Then drop a single word in the comments, the name of the town, state, or country you are watching from tonight. I read every one. I answer as many as I can. Somewhere out there, a rancher's daughter is about to prove that a ruin is only a ruin until someone decides to see it differently. Let's go see how far she takes it, together. Lessons from Amos Boone. Braddock Ranch stretched across 11,000 acres of Montana grassland, and for 18 years, Amos Boone had kept every acre of it breathing. He was the foreman, the man Silas Braddock trusted with the books, the herds, the water rights, and the men who worked under him. Amos had a daughter, and from the time she could walk a fence line without falling, he decided she would not grow up ignorant of the land that fed her. Other girls in the territory learned needlework and hymns. Eliza Boone learned how to read a brand, how to test the sweetness of a spring before letting cattle drink from it, and how to balance a ledger so tight that not a single dollar could hide inside it. Amos taught her in the evenings, after the herds were settled, spreading his worn ledgers across the kitchen table by lamplight. A ranch is not cattle and grass, he told her once, tapping the table with a calloused finger. A ranch is water, patience, and telling the truth to your own numbers before anyone else reads them. Eliza absorbed it the way dry ground absorbs rain. By 14, she could tell you which pasture was overgrazed just by the color of the grass at sunset. By 18, she was quietly correcting errors in the Braddock Ranch books before her father even noticed them, though she never told Silas Braddock that his own foreman's daughter had saved him from a bad deal with a cattle buyer from Bozeman. Amos never boasted about what he taught her. He worried, sometimes late at night, that a woman with too much knowledge made men nervous. But he could not bring himself to raise a daughter who knew less than she was capable of knowing. Someday, he told her, the winter before he died, you'll need all of this. Not because I'll be gone. Just because a person should never depend on someone else to understand her own life. He did not know how soon those words would be tested. Banished. Amos Boone died in the coldest week of January, his lungs finally giving out after decades of frontier winters. Eliza buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch he had spent his life protecting, and for 3 days afterward, she could not bring herself to open his ledgers. Silas Braddock attended the funeral in a black coat that had clearly never seen a day of ranch work. He offered his condolences with the practiced warmth of a man reading from a card. Then, less than 2 weeks later, he summoned Eliza to the main house. The room smelled of leather and pipe smoke. Silas sat behind a desk twice the size he needed, his silver-streaked hair combed back, his gray eyes cool and unreadable. "Your father served me well," he said. "I intend to see that his memory is honored." Eliza said nothing. She had learned from Amos that silence often revealed more than questions. "You understand," Silas continued, "that your position here was always tied to your father's. Braddock Ranch requires a foreman's household, not a foreman's daughter living alone in the bunkhouse. It would not be proper. It would not be wise." What he did not say, but what Eliza understood clearly, was the real reason. She knew too much. She had seen the books. She knew about the cattle sold off record, the water rights quietly bought from a widow for a fraction of their worth, the small dishonesties that had built part of Silas Braddock's fortune. A loyal foreman's daughter was one thing. A sharp-eyed young woman with nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose was a different kind of risk. "I have decided to be generous," Silas said, sliding a folded deed across the desk. "Ashby Crossing. 300 acres, a house, barns, and outbuildings. Yours, free and clear, in exchange for your father's years of service." Eliza had heard of Ashby Crossing the way children hear of ghost stories. Abandoned for nearly 20 years. Cursed, some said, though Amos had always told her curses were just excuses people gave for their own laziness. She unfolded the deed with steady hands while half the household staff watched from the doorway, whispering behind their fingers. Silas smiled the smile of a man certain he had won something. "I trust you'll find it a fitting inheritance." Eliza looked at him, and for a moment, something in her calm face made him falter, though he could not have said why. "Thank you," she said, exactly as her father would have. "I will." She signed her name in a steady hand. She did not cry. She did not beg. She folded the deed, tucked it inside her father's ledger, and walked out past the servants who expected to see her broken. They did not understand yet. Neither did Silas. The Forgotten Ranch. Eliza left Braddock Ranch with her father's saddle, his ledgers, a trunk of clothes, a rifle, and a mule named Clementine who had outlived 3 ranch hands and 1 bad winter. The journey to Ashby Crossing took the better part of a day, the road narrowing from wagon-worn trail to little more than a deer path the closer she came. When the house finally came into view, Eliza stopped Clementine and simply looked at it for a long while. The main house stood 2 stories tall, its timber gray and warped, one shutter hanging by a single hinge like a broken wing. The barn roof had partially collapsed. The corral fencing lay scattered like fallen matchsticks. Weeds had claimed the yard so thoroughly that a person could lose a boot in them. Wind moved through the empty windows with a low sound, almost like breathing. Eliza did not weep, and she did not turn back. She had spent her whole life around ruin of one kind or another, drought years, sick cattle, broken fences. Ruin, she had learned from her father, was not a verdict. It was simply a starting point that had not been worked yet. "Well, Clementine," she said, swinging down from the saddle, "let's see what we've got." She spent the first 3 days simply walking the land, the way Amos had taught her, noting the slope of the ground, the direction of old fence lines, the places where grass still grew thick despite years of neglect, a sure sign that water lay close beneath the surface somewhere. She found a spring, nearly hidden under blackberry bramble, still running clear and cold. She found the old well, dry, but salvageable. She found a smokehouse mostly intact and a root cellar that had somehow survived 2 decades untouched. At night, alone in the drafty house, Eliza slept wrapped in her father's old coat, listening to the wind slip through gaps in the walls like a visitor testing every door. She was not afraid of the dark, or the isolation, or even the mice that had clearly claimed the pantry as their own. What frightened her, on the rare nights she allowed herself to feel it, was the possibility that she might fail. That Silas Braddock's cruel little joke of a gift might turn out to be exactly what he intended, a slow and humiliating end dressed up as an opportunity. She pushed the thought down the way her father had taught her to push down fear on a stormy night with cattle scattered across open range. Fear did not fix fences. Fear did not clear irrigation ditches. Work did. By day 3, her hands had blistered and healed and blistered again. She had cleared the worst of the brush from the yard, patched the roof of the smokehouse, and coaxed the old well pump back into groaning, reluctant motion. She talked to Clementine more than was strictly reasonable, narrating her plans out loud as though the mule might offer an opinion. On the 4th night, working by candlelight to pry up a warped floorboard in the ranch house that had been troubling her boot heel all week, Eliza discovered something that would change everything. Ruth Ashby's legacy. Beneath the floorboard lay a shallow compartment, and inside it, wrapped in oilcloth to keep out the damp, sat a stack of journals and a rolled map, the paper yellowed but intact. Eliza carried them to the table with the same care her father had once used with a newborn calf. The journals belonged to Ruth Ashby, the woman who had owned this land before it fell to ruin. Her handwriting was neat, patient, written by someone who clearly loved this ground the way Amos had loved Braddock Ranch. The pages described everything. The location of 2 underground springs no one in the territory remembered, a forgotten irrigation channel dug by Ruth's late husband, notes on which valleys held the richest grazing during dry years, warnings about a stretch of low ground that flooded every 3rd spring, and careful records of cattle breeding lines that had once made Ashby Crossing one of the finest ranches in the territory before disease, drought, and violent raids emptied it out. One entry, dated some 22 years earlier, stopped Eliza cold. "I am dying, and there is no one left to carry this land forward." If these words ever find someone with the patience to read them and the courage to try, know this: the land was never cursed. It was only waiting. Eliza sat with that sentence for a long time. Ruth Ashby had died before she could finish restoring her own legacy. Now, decades later, her careful records had found their way into the hands of another woman starting over with nothing but grit and inherited knowledge. "I hear you," Eliza said quietly to the empty room. "I'll finish it." She spent the rest of that night by candlelight, copying Ruth's notes into her father's old ledger, cross-referencing them with what she had already observed walking the land. By morning, she had a plan. Ashby Crossing was not cursed. It had simply been abandoned before anyone finished the work of understanding it. First allies. Word traveled fast in a small territory, and within a week, most of the county knew Eliza Boone had taken up residence at the old Ashby place. Most assumed she would last a month before giving up and drifting off to some other town. Gideon Mercer, the retired carpenter who lived 2 miles down the road, rode over mostly out of curiosity, and partly because his late wife would have scolded him for letting a young woman struggle alone without at least checking on her. He found Eliza on the barn roof, replacing shingles with a hand saw and more determination than skill. "You'll fall and break your neck doing it that way," he called up. "Then I suppose you'd better teach me the right way," Eliza called back, without missing a beat. Something about her directness made the old carpenter laugh for the first time in longer than he could remember. He climbed up, inspected her work, and shook his head. "Not bad for someone who's never framed a roof line before. Come down. I'll show you properly." Gideon's son, Levi Mercer, a blacksmith with sandy brown hair and the quiet steadiness of a man who preferred working with his hands over speaking, arrived a few days later to help repair the wagon and gate hinges. He did not say much on his first visit, only nodded when introduced, and set to work without complaint. Eliza noticed him watching her check the pH of the soil near the old garden plot with a strip of litmus paper her father had shown her how to use years earlier. "Most folks just plant and hope," Levi said. "Hope's a poor substitute for testing your ground first," Eliza replied. Levi's mouth curved into the beginning of a smile he seemed determined not to let fully form. "You sound like you know what you're doing." "I do," Eliza said simply, and went back to work. He came back the next week to finish the gate hinges, though the gate had needed only one more bolt and both of them knew it. He stayed for supper, a plain meal of beans and cornbread that Eliza apologized for and Levi ate 2 full helpings of without complaint. They talked about soil and cattle prices and, eventually, about her father, and Levi listened the way few people ever had, without rushing to fill the silences she left for grief. "My mother passed when I was young," he told her, turning his coffee cup slowly in his hands. "Dad never talks about it much. Just works. I think that's how some men grieve, with their hands instead of their words." "That sounds like my father," Eliza said. "And maybe like me." Levi looked up at her then, something quiet and understanding passing between them that needed no further explanation. It was not romance yet, only the quiet respect of 2 people who valued competence over flattery. But something had been planted that day, the same as anything worth growing. In town, Nora Whitlock, who ran the general store with an apron perpetually dusted in flour, took a liking to Eliza almost immediately. "Any woman brave enough to move into that old ruin deserves credit around here," Nora said, wrapping a bundle of nails Eliza had purchased on credit. "Most men wouldn't take it on." "Most men haven't read Ruth Ashby's journals," Eliza said, and left it at that, letting Nora's imagination fill in the mystery. By the end of the week, half the town had heard that the new owner of Ashby Crossing had found something buried in the old house, and curiosity, more than pity, began drawing people her way. Trouble on the frontier. Not everyone welcomed Eliza's progress. Calvin Rhodes, Silas Braddock's newly appointed estate manager, had built his position on convincing Braddock Ranch's neighbors that Ashby Crossing was worthless, mostly because Silas had told everyone the same story and Calvin had no interest in his employer looking foolish. When word reached him that Eliza was restoring fences and clearing the old irrigation channel, he grew uneasy in a way that had nothing to do with genuine concern for her well-being. The first sign of trouble came when Eliza found 3 sections of newly repaired fence torn down overnight, the posts pulled clean from the ground rather than simply broken, the work of hands, not weather. The second came a week later, when 8 of her newly acquired cattle went missing from the north pasture, driven off through a gap deliberately cut in the fence line. Eliza did not panic. She rode to town, reported the theft to Marshal Owen Talbot, a steady, square-jawed lawman who had known Amos Boone and respected him. "I'll look into it," the marshal told her, "but I'll be honest with you, Miss Boone. Some folks around here would rather see you fail than help you succeed. Watch your back." There was humor amid the hardship, too. One especially stubborn bull, which Eliza had named Braddock out of pure spite, developed a habit of escaping every enclosure she built for him and wandering straight into Nora Whitlock's vegetable garden. By the third escape, half the town had heard the story, and Nora took to greeting Eliza with, "Has Braddock been behaving himself?" loud enough to make even Marshal Talbot chuckle. Rumors began circulating that Eliza had stolen records from Braddock Ranch, planted by Calvin Rhodes through careless talk at the saloon, designed to make the town suspicious of her rather than sympathetic. A few longtime Braddock associates began avoiding her in town, whispering when she passed. Eliza felt the sting of it, felt the old fear her father had warned her about, the fear of trusting people only to be betrayed again. But she kept working. She rebuilt what was torn down. She reported every theft. She let her results speak louder than the rumors, even when it would have been easier to give up and disappear the way everyone expected. A ranch reborn. By the second summer, Ashby Crossing had transformed enough that even skeptics could no longer deny it. The underground springs Ruth Ashby had documented were running clean into restored stock ponds. The old irrigation channel, cleared of decades of silt and debris with the help of Gideon, Levi, and 2 hired hands Eliza could finally afford to pay, carried water into pastures that had not seen green grass in a generation. Cattle grazed on land that had once been considered fit only for snakes and dust. Ezekiel Harlan, an elderly and deeply respected cattle breeder in the territory, rode out one afternoon expecting to find the ruin everyone described. Instead, he found healthy grass, well-fenced pastures, and cattle in better condition than half the herds in the county. "I'll admit," he said, studying her irrigation work with the careful eye of a man who had spent 70 years reading land, "I came here to see a failure. I did not expect to see the best-managed grazing operation in this territory." He signed a grazing partnership with Eliza before he left, an agreement that instantly gave her credibility no amount of arguing could have earned. Jasper Collins, a neighboring rancher who had mocked Eliza openly at the county fair the year before, found himself eating those words when his own cattle began underperforming compared to hers during a dry summer. He rode out, stiff with pride, to ask what she was doing differently. "Water management," Eliza told him plainly. "And I test my soil before I decide what to plant where. You're welcome to see it yourself." By autumn, Jasper had adopted several of her irrigation methods on his own land, and though he never fully admitted he had been wrong about her, his respect showed in every conversation that followed. Through all of it, Levi Mercer remained a steady presence, showing up to repair equipment, staying longer than strictly necessary, finding reasons to walk the fence lines with her at sunset. Their conversations grew longer, quieter, filled with the kind of comfortable silence that only grows between two people who trust each other's judgment. One evening, repairing a gate hinge together as the sky turned gold over the mountains, Levi finally said what he had clearly been holding back for months. "You didn't need any of us, you know. You'd have rebuilt this place with or without help." "Maybe," Eliza admitted. "But it's better with help. My father taught me how to run a ranch. He never got the chance to teach me it's alright to let people in." Levi looked at her for a long moment, something steady and warm in his quiet blue eyes. "Good thing you're learning that now." He reached out and brushed a smear of dust from her cheek, his hand lingering a moment longer than the task required. Eliza did not pull away. The evening air smelled of cut grass and wood smoke, and for a heartbeat neither of them said anything at all, the space between them narrowing without either one deciding to move closer. "Levi Mercer," Eliza said softly, "are you courting me, or just fixing my gate?" "Might be doing both," he admitted, a slow grin breaking across his face. "Haven't decided which one I'm better at." She laughed, a full and unguarded sound she had not allowed herself in a long time, and when he finally leaned in to kiss her, gently, like a question rather than a claim, she answered it without hesitation. It was the first time since her father's death that Eliza had felt entirely, unhurriedly happy. Scandal and truth. Just as Ashby Crossing began earning genuine respect across the territory, Calvin Rhodes made his boldest move yet. He spread word through the saloon and the county land office that Eliza Boone had stolen confidential ranch records from Braddock Ranch before her dismissal, records he claimed proved she intended to undercut Silas Braddock's cattle contracts using inside knowledge. The accusation spread fast, the way accusations always do, faster than truth ever manages to travel. A few of Eliza's newer business partners grew cautious. Whispers followed her into town. For the first time since arriving at Ashby Crossing, Eliza felt the ground beneath her genuinely shift. Marshal Owen Talbot, however, did not simply accept a rumor at face value. He requested the actual Braddock Ranch account books for review, citing his authority to investigate a formal accusation of theft. What he found was not evidence against Eliza at all, but evidence against Calvin Rhodes himself. Falsified grazing reports, inflated cattle counts sold to unsuspecting buyers, and altered records designed to skim profit for himself while blaming losses on poor management from the previous foreman, Amos Boone. The marshal called a public meeting at the town hall, laying the evidence out plainly before half the county, Silas Braddock included. "Calvin Rhodes has been cheating ranchers in this territory for over a year," Marshal Talbot announced. "And he tried to cover his own dishonesty by accusing an innocent woman of theft to distract from it." Calvin's composure finally cracked in public for the first time, his confident posture collapsing into stammering denial that convinced no one. Silas Braddock, forced to confront the fact that his own hand-picked manager had been quietly defrauding him and his neighbors, said nothing, his silver-streaked composure visibly shaken. The town rallied behind Eliza that day in a way it never had before. Nora hugged her outside the hall. Ezekiel shook her hand. Even Jasper Collins offered a stiff but sincere apology. Eliza felt something loosen inside her that had been tight since the day Silas dismissed her. Not vengeance, exactly. Something closer to vindication, and beneath that, a quiet peace she had not expected. Later that night, sitting with Hattie Sloane over tea made from herbs Hattie had gathered herself, Eliza admitted how close she had come to believing the rumors would ruin everything she had built. "Truth is slower than gossip," Hattie said, stirring honey into her cup with the unhurried patience of a woman who had outlasted plenty of scandal in her own time. "But it's steadier. Gossip burns fast and leaves nothing behind. Truth just keeps standing, long after the talk dies down. You did right, staying the course instead of shouting back." "It didn't feel like doing right," Eliza said. "It felt like waiting to drown." "Most worthwhile things do, right up until they don't," Hattie said, and patted her hand. "Fire on the prairie. The following summer brought the driest season the territory had seen in a decade, and with it came the thing every rancher feared most, wildfire. It began miles away, sparked by dry lightning, and within a day, the wind had carried it dangerously close to 3 neighboring ranches, including Jasper Collins's land and the outer edge of Braddock Ranch itself. Eliza did not hesitate. Ruth Ashby's journals had described firebreaks dug decades earlier along the ridge separating Ashby Crossing from the surrounding grassland, wide channels meant to stop exactly this kind of disaster. Eliza had cleared and restored those firebreaks the previous spring, more out of thoroughness than any expectation of needing them so soon. She rode out with Levi, Gideon, and every hand she could gather, organizing ranchers from 3 properties into a coordinated effort using her restored water channels to soak the ground ahead of the fire's path and widen the firebreaks further with shovel and plow. "You actually know what you're doing," Jasper shouted over the roar of wind and distant flame, working a shovel beside her. "I read," Eliza shouted back. "You should try it sometime." Even Silas Braddock, watching the flames threaten his own land, found himself following instructions from the very woman he had once dismissed as a liability, his pride burning away faster than the grass around them. By the following morning, the fire had been contained at the firebreaks, exhausted of fuel before it could reach a single home or barn. Hundreds of cattle across 3 ranches survived. Not a single structure on Ashby Crossing, Collins Land, or Braddock Ranch was lost. Silas Braddock stood at the edge of the scorched earth afterward, ash still drifting on the wind, and looked at Eliza in a way he never had before, not as an inconvenience, not as a liability, but as someone who had just saved everything he owned. "Your father would be proud," he said quietly, the first honest words he had ever spoken to her. "He taught me everything I know," Eliza replied. "You just gave me the land to prove it on." The pride of the frontier. By the time the annual Frontier Cattle Fair arrived that autumn, Ashby Crossing had become something no one in the territory could have predicted 3 years earlier, the most admired ranch in the region. Thousands attended the fair that year, drawn partly by tradition and partly by curiosity about the ranch everyone had once called cursed. They found lush grazing fields stretching to the horizon, healthy cattle grazing beside a thriving orchard Eliza had planted using Ruth Ashby's notes, working irrigation channels, and a community of families who had found steady work and fair treatment under Eliza's management. Ezekiel Harlan gave a speech that day praising Ashby Crossing as proof that knowledge and integrity mattered more than inherited wealth. Marshall Owen Talbot spoke about the importance of standing by the truth even when rumor moved faster. Nora Whitlock cried, unashamed, telling anyone nearby that she had known Eliza was special from the very first week. That evening, as the fair wound down beneath lanterns strung between the barns, Levi Mercer found Eliza standing near the restored well, looking out over land that had once been considered worthless. "I've been thinking," he said, turning the brim of his hat between his hands, uncharacteristically nervous for a man usually so steady. "About the future. About this place. About you." "That's a lot of thinking for one evening," Eliza said, smiling. "I love you, Eliza Boone. I have for a while now. I'd like to build a life here, with you, if you'll let me." Eliza looked at the ranch around her, the barns Gideon had helped rebuild, the fences Levi had mended 100 times over, the fields that owed their green to a dead woman's careful handwriting and her father's quiet lessons. Everything she had built stood as proof that ruin was never permanent, only unfinished. "Yes," she said simply. "I'll let you." Silas Braddock attended the celebration that followed, standing somewhat apart from the crowd, watching the woman he had once tried to erase now stand at the center of the most respected ranch in the territory. He had lost nothing material that day. He had simply been forced to witness, in full public view, exactly how wrong he had been. In the months that followed, ranchers from across the territory sought Eliza's advice on irrigation, soil testing, and fair management practices, the very same people who had once laughed at her inheritance. Calvin Rhodes left the territory entirely, his reputation beyond repair. Silas Braddock, humbled in a way pride rarely allows, quietly adopted several of Eliza's water conservation methods on his own land, crediting her without prompting whenever asked. Eliza married Levi the following spring, beneath the same sky that had once watched her arrive at Ashby Crossing with nothing but a mule, a rifle, and her father's ledgers. Gideon walked her partway down the aisle himself, insisting an old carpenter had earned the right. Hattie Sloane, who had spent 2 years teaching Eliza the quiet wisdom of patience over her herb garden, cried through the entire ceremony and blamed it on the wind. Standing at the edge of her thriving orchard that evening, Eliza thought of her father's words from years before. A ranch is not cattle and grass. It is water, patience, and the truth. She had built a life on exactly that truth, and no one, not Silas Braddock, not Calvin Rhodes, not 20 years of abandonment, had been able to take it from her. The estate once considered a punishment had become her kingdom after all, exactly as Ruth Ashby had hoped someone, someday, would prove it could be.